The Sparrow was a small ship, barely big enough for one person and some cargo. But Ellen Park loved it more than anything she had ever owned. She had been flying mail routes for 8 years now, crossing the vast emptiness between stars to deliver packages and letters to places most people forgot existed. It was not glamorous work, and it did not pay well. But Ellen did not mind. She liked the quiet, the solitude, the simple satisfaction of a job. The Draconis Empire stretched across 12 star systems, and at its heart were the Vareth, the dragon species that ruled everything. They were magnificent and terrifying creatures, some as large as buildings, with scales that could stop military weapons and breath that burned hotter than plasma cannons. They lived for thousands of years, and they viewed humans the way humans might view insects. Small and brief, and mostly beneath notice, Ellen had seen Vareth many times during her years as a courier, but she had never spoken to one directly. There was no reason for a dragon to speak to a mail carrier today. She was approaching Outpost Kira 7, a mining station on the edge of Vareth space where humans dug valuable minerals from dead asteroids. The station was gray and ugly, built for function rather than comfort. And Ellen had visited it dozens of times before she docked her ship and grabbed the 3 packages she needed to deliver. Medical supplies mostly, along with a few personal items that miners had ordered from distant colonies. The station chief was a big man named Dane Mercer, with a thick beard and tired eyes. He met Ellen at the docking bay and took the packages from her hands. "Thanks for coming all the way out here," he said. His voice rough from years of breathing recycled air. Ellen shrugged and said it was her job. Dan looked at her for a moment, then glanced back toward the station interior. "We have a situation here," he said slowly, "and I am not sure what to do about it." Ellen waited for him to continue. "There is a young Vareth stuck on this station," Dan explained. "His ship broke down 3 days ago, and none of the dragon vessels will come to get him, because he is too young and too unimportant for them to bother." Ellen raised her eyebrows at this information. "He has been staying in our cargo bay," Dan continued. "And honestly, he's driving everyone crazy, complaining about the food and the temperature and the smell of humans. What do you want me to do about it?" Ellen asked. Dan shrugged and said, "You could give him a ride to the nearest Vareth colony. It is only 2 days off your route, and then he would be someone else's problem." Ellen thought about this for a moment. She had empty cargo space, and 2 days was not a significant delay. "Fine," she said. "Bring him to my ship." Dan warned her that humans who got too close to dragons usually regretted it. But Ellen just shrugged again. She had been doing this job for 8 years, and she had learned not to worry about things she could not control. The young dragon's name was Sarath, and he was small by Vareth standards, only about twice the size of Ellen's shuttle. His scales were deep blue, not yet fully hardened, and his eyes burned with the arrogance of youth. He looked at Ellen's ship with obvious disgust. "This is what you expect me to travel in?" he demanded, his voice like thunder in a small room. Ellen did not flinch. She simply told him that he could wait for another ride if he preferred. Sarath's pride would not allow him to stay on a human mining station any longer. So he squeezed himself into the Sparrow's cargo hold and complained about every inch of the journey. Ellen ignored him and focused on her flying. The route to the nearest Vareth colony required passing through a dangerous asteroid field, a region of tumbling rocks and sudden gravity shifts that had destroyed many ships over the years. Ellen had flown through it before. She knew its patterns and its dangers, and she guided the Sparrow through the chaos with calm precision. Sarath stopped complaining and started watching. He watched how Ellen's hands moved across the controls, never hesitating, never second-guessing. Watched how her breathing stayed slow and steady, even when massive rocks spun past the windows, close enough to touch. He watched how her heartbeat, which his dragon senses could hear perfectly, never quickened even in the most dangerous moments. something stirred in the back of Sarath's ancient memory. Something his elders had spoken of in whispers when they thought no young dragons were listening. There was a story, all beyond measure, about a human who had saved the Vareth from extinction. The elders called her the Mother of Continuation, and they said her bloodline carried a mark that only dragons could send. Zajoth had always thought it was just a legend, a myth from times so distant that truth and fiction had blurred together. But watching this quiet human woman fly through death with the calmness of deep water, he began to wonder, "Who are you?" He asked suddenly, his voice no longer arrogant but genuinely curious. Ellen glanced at him briefly and said, "She was just a mail courier." Sarath did not believe her, but he said nothing more. 2 days later, they arrived at Vareth Prime, the heart of the Dragon Empire. Ellen expected to drop Sarath at a freight dock and continue on her way, but the young dragon insisted she land at the central spaceport. Instead, Ellen did not understand why, but she was too tired to argue. She brought the Sparrow down on the landing pad. Sarath indicated and began her post-flight checklist. "You should come outside," Sarath said, and there was something strange in his voice, something almost like reverence. Ellen sighed and opened the cargo bay door. She stepped out onto the landing pad and stopped breathing. 3 elder Vareth stood before her, each one larger than her entire ship, their scales shimmering with colors that had no names in human language. Ellen had never seen anything so beautiful or so terrifying in her entire life. She expected them to speak to Sarath, to welcome him home, to ignore the small human who had delivered him. Instead, all 3 of them lowered their massive heads to the ground. They were bowing to her. Ellen stood frozen, unable to move, unable to think, as more dragons turned to look one by one. Every Vareth in the spaceport lowered their heads in respect. Ellen Park, the mail carrier who wanted nothing more than a quiet life, stood alone in a sea of bowing dragons and wondered what she had done to deserve this. She did not know it yet, but her entire life was about to change. Ellen stood on the landing pad, surrounded by bowing dragons, and her mind refused to accept what her eyes were seeing. This had to be a mistake, some kind of misunderstanding that would be cleared up any moment. Now she was nobody, just a courier who delivered packages for a living. And dragons did not bow to nobodies. The largest of the 3 elder Vareth raised her head first. She was ancient beyond imagination, her scales a deep gold that had faded with centuries of life, and her eyes held the weight of more years than Ellen could comprehend. "I am Grandmother Cathera," the dragon said, her voice like the rumble of distant mountains, "and I have waited a very long time to meet you." Ellen Park. Ellen found her voice somewhere in the back of her throat. "There must be some mistake," she said. "I am just a mail carrier. I deliver packages. I am not anyone important." Cathera made a sound that might have been a laugh, deep and warm and old. "You are more important than you know," the ancient dragon said, "and it is time you learned the truth about your family." Ellen did not have a family. She had grown up in a colony children's home, alone from the age of 2, with no memory of her parents and no knowledge of where she came from. She told Cathera this, her voice shaking slightly. Cathera nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she already knew. "Come with me," the dragon said. "There is much to tell you, and this is not the place for such a conversation." Ellen looked back at her ship, at the Sparrow that had been her only home for so many years, and she felt a sudden urge to run. She could climb back inside, seal the doors, fly away into the darkness between stars, and pretend none of this had ever happened. But something held her in place, something stronger than fear, a need to know who she really was. She followed Cathera's ancient dragon, led her through the heart of Vareth Prime, through corridors carved from living crystal that sang with colors Ellen had never seen before. Other dragons watched them pass, and every single one of them bowed. As Ellen walked by, she kept her eyes forward and tried not to think about what it meant. Finally, They reached a chamber deep within the mountain. A vast space filled with light that seemed to come from everywhere, and nowhere Cathara settled her enormous body onto the floor and gestured for Ellen to sit as well. 800 years ago, Cathara began. A plague swept through our species, a disease that killed our hatchlings before they could break free from their shells. Ellen listened in silence as the dragon continued. We called it the Silence Plague, because our nurseries became silent, empty of the sounds of new life. And we faced extinction within a generation. Cathara's eyes grew distant with memory. Our scientists searched for a cure, but our medicine could not stop the disease. And our hatchlings kept dying, hundreds of them, then thousands. Then more than we could count. Ellen felt a chill run down her spine despite the warmth of the chamber. We were desperate, Cathara said. So desperate that we did something no Vareth had ever done before. We asked humans for help. This surprised Ellen, because the Vareth were proud creatures who rarely acknowledged that other species had anything to offer them. A human scientist answered our call, Cathara continued. A woman named Dr. Grace Park, and she came to Vareth Prime alone, armed with nothing but her knowledge and her determination. Ellen's breath caught in her throat at the name Park was her name. The name she had always carried. The name she had never known. The origin of Grace Park worked for 4 years without rest, Cathara said. She studied our biology, learned our chemistry, experimented with treatments that had never been tried before. The ancient dragon's voice softened with something like gratitude. She saved us. Ellen, she developed a cure that stopped the Silence Plague and allowed our hatchlings to survive again. And she asked for nothing in return. Ellen's mind was spinning with questions, but she forced herself to stay quiet and listen. When we offered her wealth and power and anything else she desired, Cathara continued. She refused it all. She asked only that we remember kindness, that we never forget what compassion could accomplish. The dragon paused and looked directly at Ellen. Grace Park was your ancestor, Cathara said. The first of your bloodline, and we have honored her memory every day since her death 300 years ago. Ellen shook her head slowly, trying to process this information. Why did no one tell me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cathara's expression darkened with old pain. Because there are those among us who did not want to be saved, she said. There are Vareth who believed the Silence Plague was natural, a test meant to strengthen our species by culling the weak. Ellen felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. They call themselves the Ash Circle, Cathara continued. And they have spent centuries trying to erase the truth of what Grace Park did for us. The ancient dragon leaned closer, and her voice dropped to a low rumble. They have hunted your bloodline, Ellen. They have killed every descendant of Grace Park they could find, because they cannot stand the thought of owing their survival to a human. The cold in Ellen's stomach spread through her entire body. My parents, she said. And it was not a question. Cathara nodded slowly. They did not die in an accident, the dragon confirmed. They were murdered when you were 2 years old, and we could not find you in time to protect you. Ellen sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing the truth of her life. Everything she had believed about herself was wrong. She was not an orphan with no history. She was the last survivor of a bloodline that had saved an entire species. What happens now? She finally escaped. Cathara rose to her full height, her golden scales catching the light. Now you are under our protection, the dragon said. The Ash Circle cannot touch you while you remain on Vareth Prime, and the Empire will know that Ellen Park is to be honored and defended. Ellen thought about this for a moment. I do not want to stay on Vareth Prime, she said quietly. I have a job. I have a life. I have mail to deliver. Cathara made that rumbling laugh again. You are stubborn, the dragon said. Just like your ancestor. Ellen stood up and faced the ancient creature without fear. I appreciate what you have told me, she said. but I am not going to hide in a dragon palace for the rest of my life. That is not who I am." Kethra studied her for a long moment, then nodded with something like respect. "Then go," the dragon said. "But know that you carry more than mail now, Alan Park. You carry the hope of everyone who believes that kindness matters more than strength." Alan walked back to her ship, past the bowing dragons, past the watching eyes, and she climbed into the Sparrow and sealed the doors behind her. She sat in the pilot's seat and stared at the controls she knew better than her own hands. Somewhere out there, enemies she had never known existed were waiting for her, but Alan Park had delivered mail through asteroid fields and plasma storms and the most dangerous places in the Empire. She was not going to let fear stop her now. Ellen left Vareth Prime 3 hours after her conversation with grandmother Kethra, ignoring the protests of the young dragon Sarath, who insisted she was being foolish. "You cannot just fly away," Sarath had argued, blocking her path to the Sparrow. "The Ash Circle will find you. They will kill you, and everything my people owe your bloodline will be forgotten." Ellen had looked up at him, this young dragon who was twice the size of her ship, and she had spoken calmly. "Move," she had said. And something in her voice made him obey now. She was alone in the darkness between stars, heading back to her route, back to her job, back to the only life she had ever known. The truth of her ancestry sat heavy in her chest, but she refused to let it change who she was. She was a mail carrier, nothing more and nothing less. And she had packages to deliver. The first day passed without incident, and Alan began to hope that maybe the Ash Circle did not know where she was. That hope died on the second day. Her sensors detected 3 ships approaching from different directions. Large vessels moving in a coordinated pattern that left no room for escape. Alan's hands tightened on the controls as she studied the readings. The ships were Vareth warcraft, old but powerful, and they were closing. Fausti's voice crackled through her communication system, cold and filled with ancient hatred. "Alan Park," the voice said, "last daughter of the false savior, your bloodline ends today." Alan did not respond. She was too busy calculating trajectories and distances. "Surrender yourself," the voice continued, "and your death will be quick. Resist, and we will make you suffer before the end." Ellen finally spoke, her voice steady despite the fear pounding in her heart. "Who are you?" she asked, buying time while her computer searched for escape routes. "I am Lord Varric," the voice replied, "leader of the Ash Circle, defender of Vareth purity, and I have waited a long time to finish what we started when we killed your parents." Ellen felt anger rise in her chest, hot and fierce, but she pushed it down. Anger would not save her. Only clear thinking would. "My ancestors saved your species," she said. "She gave you a future when you had none." Varric made a sound of disgust that echoed through the communication channel. "She corrupted our species," he snarled. "The silence plague was meant to cull the weak, to make us stronger, but your ancestor interfered with nature, and now we carry flawed bloodlines in our veins." Ellen shook her head, even though Varric could not see her. "That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard," she said. Varric's voice grew colder. "You have 10 seconds to surrender," he said, "or we will open fire." Ellen did not have weapons, did not have shields, did not have any way to fight 3 warships designed to destroy vessels 10 times the size of the Sparrow, but she had something else. She had 8 years of experience flying through the most dangerous spaces in the Empire. And she had a destination in mind. "Come and get me," she said. And she pushed the Sparrow to maximum speed. The 3 warships fired, and the space around Ellen erupted with plasma bolts and energy beams. She dove and rolled and spun, using every trick she had learned in her years as a courier. And somehow she stayed alive. The Crimson Nebula was ahead, a swirling mass of red and orange clouds that filled the space between 2 dying stars. No sane pilot entered the Crimson Nebula. It was filled with plasma storms and radiation bursts, and Gravitational anomalies that could tear a ship apart without warning. Ellen headed straight for it. She is running for the nebula. One of the Ash Circle pilots reported, his voice carrying disbelief. Follow her, Varek commanded. She cannot escape. Ellen hit the edge of the nebula and plunged inside, and immediately the world became chaos. Plasma clouds swirled around her ship. Glowing with heat that would melt most metals, radiation alarms screamed in her cockpit as invisible energy washed over the Sparrow. Gravity shifted without pattern, pulling her left, then right, then up, then down. Ellen flew through it all with the calm focus of someone who had done this 100 times before. The Imperial Mail Service did not hire ordinary pilots. They hired the best. People who could deliver packages anywhere under any conditions on any schedule. Ellen had earned her place among them by flying routes that other couriers refused to touch. The Crimson Nebula was dangerous, yes, but it was not unknown to her. She had studied its patterns, learned its rhythms, mapped its hidden paths during her years of flying the outer territories. The Ash Circle pilots had no such knowledge. The first warship fell behind within minutes, its pilot too cautious to follow Ellen through a narrow gap between two plasma clouds. The second warship pushed deeper into the nebula, but a radiation burst caught its sensors and left it blind and drifting. Only Varek remained in pursuit, his ancient warship cutting through the chaos with the determination of pure hatred. You cannot outrun me forever. Varek's voice came through her speakers. I have hunted your bloodline across centuries. I will not fail now. Ellen did not waste breath responding. She needed all her focus for what came next. Ahead of her was the Dragon's Mouth, the most dangerous place in the entire nebula, a gravitational sink created by the collapsed remains of a dead star. Anything that entered the Dragon's Mouth was crushed into nothing. Ellen aimed straight for it, saw what she was doing and laughed. You would rather die than face me? He taunted. Your ancestor would be ashamed. Ellen ignored him and flew closer to the edge of the gravitational sink. She could feel the pull on her ship. Gentle at first, then stronger, like hands reaching out to grab and wrap the last possible moment. She cut her engines and let the Sparrow drift. The small ship skimmed the edge of the Dragon's Mouth, caught in its gravity, but not quite pulled in. And Ellen used the momentum to slingshot around, and a Waverek tried to follow. But his warship was too large, too heavy, too slow to make the same maneuver. The gravitational sink caught him and held him tight. No. Varek's voice came through the speakers, filled with shock and rage. This is impossible. You are just a human. You are nothing. Ellen watched on her sensors as Varek's ship was dragged toward destruction. I am a mail carrier, she said quietly, and I deliver to places you cannot imagine. In his final moments, Varek broadcast a message to his followers, declaring Ellen Park an enemy of all true Vareth, a threat to their purity that must be destroyed at any cost. Then the Dragon's Mouth swallowed him, and there was silence. Ellen flew out of the nebula on the far side, her ship damaged and her oxygen running low. But she was alive. She had killed the leader of the Ash Circle with nothing but skill and determination. But as she drifted in the empty space, watching her life support readings drop slowly toward zero, she wondered if anyone would ever know what happened here. She activated her distress beacon and settled back in her seat to wait. Either help would come, or it would not. Either way, she had done everything she could. Ellen watched the oxygen meter on her dashboard drop lower with each passing minute. She had maybe 2 hours of air left, maybe less if she kept breathing this hard. And she was a long way from anywhere that mattered. The Sparrow drifted in the darkness beyond the Crimson Nebula, its engines damaged from the chase, its hull scorched from plasma exposure. But still holding together, Ellen had to give her little ship credit. It had survived things that would have destroyed vessels 3 times its size. She leaned back in her pilot's seat and stared at the stars through her cracked viewport. Somewhere out there, the Ash Circle was still hunting her. Varek's final broadcast had made sure of that. and she was in no condition to run if they found her, but she was too tired to worry about things she could not control. She had done what she could. She had survived what should have been impossible, and if this was where her story ended, then at least she had ended it on her own terms. The distress beacon blinked steadily in the corner of her vision, sending out its signal into the void. Ellen closed her eyes and let herself rest. She dreamed of her ancestor, Grace Park, the woman who had saved an entire species with nothing but knowledge and compassion in the dream. Grace was sitting across from her in the Sparrow's cramped cockpit, smiling with kind eyes. "You did well," Grace said. "Better than anyone could have expected." Ellen wanted to ask her so many questions about her life, about her choices, about why she had helped creatures who did not even like humans. But before she could speak, alarms pulled her back to consciousness. Her sensors were screaming warnings. Multiple contacts approaching from all directions. And Ellen's heart sank as she realized the ash circle had found hers. She forced herself upright and looked at the readings, preparing to face death with open eyes. Then she looked again, because something was wrong with what she was seeing. The ships approaching were not warcraft. They were too big, too slow, too bright with running lights that proclaimed their presence to the universe. The first voice that came through her communication system was young and eager and familiar. "Ellen," Sarath's voice said. "We found you. We actually found you. Do not die before we get there." Ellen blinked in confusion as more ships appeared on her sensors. There were dozens of them. Varith vessels of every size and type, from small personal craft to massive carrier ships that could hold entire fleets. Grandmother Kethra's voice came through next, ancient and warm. "When you activated your distress beacon," the old dragon said, "every Varith who heard it dropped what they were doing and flew to help." Ellen could not believe what she was hearing. "Why?" she managed to ask, her voice cracked from dehydration and exhaustion. "Because you are Ellen Park," Kethra replied simply, "and we remember our debts." The first rescue ship reached her within minutes, attaching itself to the Sparrow's damaged hull and pumping fresh oxygen into her failing life support. Ellen breathed deeply and felt tears running down her face, though she was not sure if they were from relief or oxygen deprivation or something else entirely. More ships arrived, forming a protective sphere around her tiny vessel. And Ellen realized with shock that she was looking at a significant portion of the Varith fleet. They had come for her, all of them, because a mail carrier had sent a distress signal, but the rescue was not complete. Because the ash circle had heard the same signal. A group of warships emerged from hyperspace on the edge of the gathering, smaller than the force that had accompanied Varric, but still dangerous. They were the remnants of the ash circle, the faithful who had heard their leader's final broadcast and come to finish what he started. "Surrender the human," one of them demanded, his voice carrying the same hatred that Varex had held. "She murdered Lord Varric. She must pay for her crime." Ellen expected Grandmother Kethra to respond, but it was Sarath who spoke first. "She murdered no one," the young dragon said, his voice shaking with fury. "She defended herself against cowards who attacked an unarmed mail carrier. She led him into the dragon's mouth." The Ash Circle dragon argued. "She tricked him. She outflew him," Sarath shot back, "with a cargo shuttle against a warship. Because she's better than any of you will ever be." Ellen wanted to tell Sarath to be quiet, that his pride was going to make things worse. But she did not have the strength to speak. Grandmother Kethra's voice cut through the argument like a blade through silk. "The Ash Circle has hunted this woman's family for 800 years. The ancient dragon said, "You have murdered innocent humans whose only crime was carrying a name you feared." The gathered Varith fleet shifted, turning their weapons toward the Ash Circle vessels. Lord Varric attacked Ellen Park in open space, Kethra continued. He threatened her with death. He admitted to killing her parents, and she defended herself as any creature has the right to do. The Ash Circle leader tried to respond, but Cathra was not finished. "I am giving you a choice," she said, and her voice carried the weight of someone who had lived longer than civilizations. "Stand down and face judgment for your crimes, or burn." Ellen watched through her damaged viewport as the Ash Circle ships faced the Verath fleet. They were outnumbered 20-1, maybe more, and they had to know that fighting would mean death for a long moment. No one moved then. One by one, the Ash Circle ships powered down their weapons. "We surrender," their leader said, his voice hollow with defeat. "But this is not over. The pure blood of the Verath will not bow to human corruption forever." Cathra made a sound of dismissal. "Take them into custody," she ordered. And smaller ships broke from the fleet to surround the surrendered vessels. Ellen slumped back in her seat as the tension drained out of her body. It was over, at least for now, and she was alive, a docking tube connected to her ship. And Sarath's face appeared in her airlock, too large to fit through, but determined to see her anyway. "You look terrible," he said, but there was relief in his voice. Ellen tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. "You should see the other guy," she managed to say. Sarath made a sound that might have been a dragon's version of a chuckle. "I heard what you did," he said, "flying through the Crimson Nebula, using the dragon's mouth to destroy Varric. That was incredible." Ellen shook her head weakly. "That was survival," she said. "Nothing more." "That is what courage usually looks like," Sarath replied. And Ellen recognized the words that grandmother Cathra had spoken to her once before. Medical teams arrived to take Ellen to the flagship, and she let them carry her without protest. She was too tired to walk, too tired to think, too tired to do anything but breathe and be grateful for another chance at life. As they moved her through the rescue ship, she passed windows that looked out on the assembled fleet. Dragons of every age and color floated in the darkness, their ships forming a protective wall around the tiny sparrow. They had come for her, all of them, because she was Ellen Park, because her ancestor had taught them what kindness meant, because sometimes the smallest people carried the biggest hearts. Ellen closed her eyes and let herself rest. Tomorrow she would figure out what came next, but for now she was safe, and that was enough. Ellen woke up in a bed that was far too comfortable to be her bunk on the Sparrow. The ceiling above her was made of crystal that caught light and scattered it into rainbows, and the air smelled clean and fresh, and nothing like the recycled atmosphere she was used to. She sat up slowly, her body aching from injuries she did not remember receiving, and looked around at the most beautiful room she had ever seen. Everything was built on a massive scale, designed for creatures far larger than humans. But someone had placed human-sized furniture near the window so she could look out at the stars. A voice spoke from across the room, ancient and familiar. "You have been asleep for 3 days," Grandmother Cathra said. "Your body needed time to heal." Ellen turned and saw the golden dragon resting on a platform that let them speak at eye level. "Thank you," Ellen said, "for coming to save me, for sending the fleet, for everything." Cathra made a dismissive gesture with one enormous claw. "We did not save you," she said. "You saved yourself. We simply arrived in time to witness the end." Ellen shook her head in disagreement. "I was running out of air," she said. "Another hour and I would have died." "Perhaps," Cathra acknowledged. "But you survived the Crimson Nebula and destroyed the leader of the Ash Circle with nothing but a mail shuttle and your own skill. That is not something anyone else could have done." Ellen did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Cathra studied her for a long moment, those ancient eyes seeing things that Ellen could not imagine. "Your ancestor Grace was remarkable," the dragon finally said. "But I think you may be even more so." Ellen laughed despite herself. "Grace Park developed a cure that saved your entire species," she said. "I deliver mail." Cathra leaned closer. And her voice dropped to a low rumble. "Grace Park saved us with medicine," she said. "You saved us with something more important." Ellen waited for her to explain. "You reminded us what courage looks like," Cathera continued. "Not the courage of warriors with fire and claws, but the courage of someone small and fragile who refuses to give up." The ancient dragon settled back on her platform. "The Ash Circle believed that strength comes from purity," she said. "That only the powerful deserve to survive. That kindness is weakness and compassion is corruption." Her eyes met Ellen's directly. "You proved them wrong," Cathera said. "A human mail carrier with no weapons and no armor defeated their greatest warrior. Not through violence, but through skill and determination, and the refusal to be afraid." Ellen thought about this for a while. Sitting in that beautiful room above the stars, she had never thought of herself as brave. She had just been trying to survive, doing what needed to be done, because there was no other choice. But maybe that was what courage really was. Not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear make your decisions. What happens now? Ellen Cathara made that rumbling sound that might have been a laugh. "That depends on you," she said. "You could stay here on Vareth Prime, live in comfort, never worry about danger again." Ellen already knew she would not do that. "Or?" she asked. "Or you could go back to your life," Cathera said. "Deliver your mail, fly your routes, be exactly who you have always been." Ellen nodded slowly. "I would like my ship back." Cathara gestured toward the window, and Ellen looked out to see the Sparrow floating in space nearby, fully repaired and gleaming with new parts. "We took the liberty of upgrading a few systems," Cathera said. "Better engines, stronger hull, improved life support. But it is still the same ship." Ellen felt tears threatening again, and she blinked them away. "Thank you," she said. And she meant it more than she had ever meant anything. 2 weeks later, Ellen was back on her route, delivering packages to remote stations and colonies across the Empire. The Sparrow flew better than ever, its new engines eating up the distance between stars. And Ellen found herself smiling as she worked. Things were different now. She could not pretend otherwise when she landed at stations. Dragons bowed as she passed, not because she demanded it, not because she was royalty, but because she had earned their respect. At first, it made her uncomfortable, this constant reminder that her life had changed. But slowly she began to accept it. She was still Ellen Park, still a mail carrier, still the quiet woman who kept to herself and did her job without complaint. But she was also the last daughter of Grace Park, the woman who had reminded an empire what kindness meant. She could be both things at once. Shroth had appointed himself her unofficial co-pilot. Much to her annoyance, the young dragon could not actually fit inside the Sparrow, but he followed her in his own ship. Claiming that someone needed to keep an eye on her, Ellen pretended to be irritated by his presence. But secretly, she was grateful for the company. 3 months after her escape from the Crimson Nebula, Ellen landed at a small colony on the edge of explored space. She was delivering medical supplies, the same job she had done 1,000 times before. And she expected nothing unusual, but when she stepped off her ship, she found a group of young dragons waiting for her. They were barely more than hatchlings, their scales still soft, their eyes wide with wonder. "Are you really Ellen Park?" one of them asked, his voice high and eager. Ellen nodded, unsure what to say. "Our teachers told us about you," another hatchling said. "They said you flew through the dragon's mouth and survived. They said you are the bravest human who ever lived." A third one added. Ellen knelt down so she was closer to their level, even though that still left them towering over her. "I am not that brave," she said honestly. "I was scared the whole time." The hatchlings looked at each other in confusion. "But you did it anyway," one of them said. "Even though you were scared?" Ellen thought about that for a moment. "Yes," she finally admitted. "I did it anyway. The hatchlings seemed to find this answer satisfying, and they crowded around her, asking questions about her ship and her adventures, and whether it was true that humans could survive on planets that would kill. Dragonzellen answered their questions patiently, and when it was time to leave, she found herself promising to come back and tell them more stories as she flew away from the colony. Sarath's voice came through her communication system. "You are good with children," he said. Sounding surprised, Ellen shrugged, even though he could not see her. "They are curious," she said. "I remember what that was like. Will you really come back to see them?" Sarath asked. Ellen thought about the eager faces of those young dragons, the way they had looked at her with wonder and hope. "Yes," she said. "I will come back." She guided the sparrow toward her next destination, another station, another delivery, another small piece of work that kept the empire running. The stars spread out before her, endless and beautiful, and Alan Park smiled. She was just a mail carrier, nothing more and nothing less. But sometimes that was enough to change the world behind her. Across the vast reaches of the Draconis Empire, they told the story of the human who had made dragons bound not with weapons or threats or fire of her own, but with kindness and courage and a stubborn refusal to be anything other than exactly who she was. And in nurseries and schools across 12 star systems, young dragons learned that strength comes in many forms, that the smallest among them can carry the greatest heart, and that sometimes the most extraordinary heroes are the ones who never wanted to be heroes at all.